and welcome. I am Bhuvi Kingar and our subject expert is Mr. Ashish Garg, who is a professional and has been teaching at Maya Academy of Advanced Cinematics from last 5 years. Today we are going to discuss about the fundamentals of creativity in arts. We'll be covering some of the topics on arts like logics, style and value. We are going to learn about the fundamentals of creativity required in arts. Fundamentals of creativity in arts, defining creativity, logic, style. Art is a medium to convey a story, feelings or a message. Some artists convey these things through dance, paintings and others through their own style or medium of art. But there should be an out-of-the-box concept. We can also say that it could be a creatively presentable medium or concept. Art is basically based on creativity. It may or may not rely on some of the rules like logic, style and values on which we are going to talk today. Let us start with an explanation of what creativity is all about. What is creativity? How can I be creative? What is my ideal creative environment? Try and define creativity using one sentence. Can you learn to be creative? Create a list of things that help you to be creative. What do they look, sound and feel like? Create a list of things that hinder your creativity. What do they look, sound and feel like? List 2 things that each group member will try to change in the near future about their creative environment. Which characteristics of creative people do you relate to the most? Defining creativity. What exactly is creativity? It is a creation of something that is truly original and out of the box. Now this can leave a lot of room for interpretation. So let us look at it a little deeper. Let us look at how different people view creativity. You cannot use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. Maya Angelou. Creativity is marked by the ability or power to create, to bring into existence, to invest with a new form, to produce through imaginative skill, to make or bring into existence something new. Webster's Dictionary. The emergence of a novel, relational product, growing out of the uniqueness of the individual. Carl Rogers, psychologist and writer. The occurrence of a composition which is both new and valuable. Henry Miller, writer. The ability to make new combinations of social worth. John Heffel, CEO and entrepreneur. A special class of problem solving characterized by novelty. Newell, Simon and Shaw, team of logic theorists. Any thinking process in which original patterns are formed and expressed. H. Fox, scientist. Fluency, flexibility, originality and sometimes elaboration. E. Paul Torrance, educator, academic, creativity investigator. Creativity is the process of bringing something new into being. Rollo May, writer and philosopher. As mentioned before, most of these definitions share the view that something new, innovative, original, unique and novel is created. Keep this definition in mind as you explore and develop your own creativity. Behind every creation, there are some fundamentals. Let us examine some fundamental laws of creativity. Ideas are the root of all creating. Everything we create in any field, it begins with a spark of an idea. Creativity defined in its simplest terms is bringing stuff into being that was not there before. That starts in the mind with a phrase, an image, a theory or a melody. Creativity is not just about making art. Most of the time when we say, I'm just not creative, what we are really saying is, I haven't written 3 novels this year, or I haven't painted 17 pictures and held an exhibition in a National Gallery of Modern Art. We have lofty expectations of what being creative means that deflate us before we ever begin. Belief. Your beliefs define the limits of your creativity. You will only ever be as creative as you believe you can be. Your beliefs are a glass ceiling on your creative achievements. So if you don't really believe you are very creative, then your behavior will mirror that, and yes, you won't be very creative. The more creative you are, the more creative you become. This law is simple. Creativity breeds creativity. Being creative is all about flow. And as soon as you hit your stride in creating, it becomes so effortless you forget you are even doing it. But like rolling a giant snowball, it seems incredibly difficult to get that momentum started, especially if you haven't created regularly for a while. Encouragement boosts your creativity to new levels. You can only be so creative on your own. If it feels like you're forever creating in a huge vacuum and you don't know even anyone knows you are creating, let alone cares, then your creativity will grind to a standstill. By following these 5 fundamental laws of creativity, you will set yourself up for a lifetime of flowing and abundant creating. Fundamentals of creativity in arts. Now that we have an idea of what creativity is and how we can define it, let's examine what are the fundamentals of creativity in arts. Most people associate creativity with the fields of art and literature. In these fields, originality is considered to be a sufficient condition for creativity, unlike other fields where both originality and appropriateness are necessary. Within the different modes of artistic expression, one can postulate a continuum extending from interpretation to innovation. Established artistic movements pull practitioners to the interpretation end of the scale, whereas original thinkers strive towards the innovation pole. Note that we conventionally expect some creative people like dancers, actors, orchestral members, and so on to perform and interpret, while allowing others like writers, painters, composers, and so on to have more freedom to express. Characteristics of creative people. In the workplace and classroom, it is important to see each designer and student as an individual and try to identify their current level of creative ability and build upon and grow it from there. Dr. Donna Fitzroy Hardy, 2007, Professor of Psychology at California State University, Northridge, citing creativity, Flow and the Psychology of Discovery and Invention by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, 1996, outlines several personality characteristics of creative people. These characteristics are: creative individuals have a great deal of energy, but they are often quiet. Creative individuals tend to be smart, yet also naive at the same time. Creative individuals have a combination of playfulness and discipline, or responsibility and irresponsibility. Creative individuals alternate between imagination and fantasy at one end and rooted sense of reality at the other. Creative people seem to harbor opposite tendencies on the continuum between extroversion and introversion. Creative individuals are also remarkably humble and proud at the same time. Creative individuals to a certain extent escape rigid gender role stereotyping and have a tendency toward androgyny. Generally, creative people are thought to be rebellious and independent. Most creative persons are very passionate about their work, yet they can be extremely objective about it as well. They display a keen sense of humor and see humor in situations that may not appear to be humorous to others. Sometimes their humor may appear bizarre, inappropriate, irreverent to others. They are unusually aware of their impulses and are often more open to the irrational within him or herself. Exhibit heightened emotional sensitivity, may be very sensitive to beauty and visibly moved by aesthetic experiences, are frequently perceived as non-conforming accept disordered or chaotic environments or situations, are frequently not interested in details, are described as individualistic, or do not fear being classified as different, criticize constructively, and are unwilling to accept authoritarian pronouncements without overly critical self-examination. As mentioned before, it is my belief that these characteristics, while only a starting point, can help managers and teachers evaluate where their employees or students are, and in turn help them decide how to differentiate their project workload or training and delivery methods used to develop creativity. I believe strongly in pre-assessment and feel that although this is certainly a subjective area to evaluate, we should attempt to pre-assess creative abilities and use the findings to begin to teach people to be more creative, no matter what field of study they are in. Logic. Logic is the formal systematic study of the principles of valid inference and correct reasoning. Logic is used in most intellectual activities, but is studied primarily in the disciplines of philosophy, mathematics, semantics, and computer science. Logic examines general forms which arguments may take, which forms are valid and which are fallacies. In philosophy, the study of logic figures in most major areas: epistemology, ethics, and metaphysics. In mathematics, it is the study of valid inferences within some formal language. Logic is also studied in argumentation theory. Logic was studied in several ancient civilizations, including the Indian subcontinent, China, and Greece. Logic was established as a discipline by Aristotle, who gave it a fundamental place in philosophy. The study of logic was part of the classical trivium. Logic is often divided into two parts: inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Logic encompasses many different kinds of study, so that one might wonder what the common thread is. Some claim that logic is the study of truth and is thus the most basic and fundamental science. While every science aims at truth, logic is the science of truth itself. It tries to discover the truth about truth. Logic studies truth in the same way that biology studies living things. Others say that logic is concerned with thought and tries to discover the laws of thought. These laws do not describe the way people actually think, for that is the task of psychology. Rather, they prescribe the way people ought to think. They describe the way a perfect mind thinks. Logic is like ethics and morality, in that it separates right from wrong. Logic, one might say, is the ethics of thought and belief. Others say that logic is essentially concerned with language in some way. Logic tries to understand the logical form of statements and certain structural relations between sentences. It is certainly true that logicians spend a lot of time studying languages, especially the artificial languages that logicians themselves have devised. Much of this course will consist of learning how to use artificial languages. Logicians also study natural languages such as English, French, and Mandarin, and so on. Most of us fear what we don't understand, and logic is no exception. Far from being a limiting factor, logic can be the catalyst for actually dislodging the wonderful that lies embedded in the recesses of the unconscious mind. A logical train of thought must follow three rules. It must be sequential. When going from A to Z, you must go from A to B, then B to C, and so forth. You may not jump directly from A to C. Each step of the process must be correct. If one of the steps violates the preconditions, the entire process is wrong. You may only use problem-relevant information. We must stay within the boundaries and guidelines given by the criteria of the system. sounds pretty inflexible and uncreative, doesn't it? Now, let's look at the creative process. Although there are many definitions of creativity, we'll use the one that's commonly used by the anti-logic camp. The creative process is a problem-solving act that involves a shift in perception, a sudden inspiration that develops a totally new way of looking at the problem. Style. In the visual arts, style refers to the aspects of the visual appearance of a work of art that relates it to the other pieces of work by the same artist or one from the same period, training, location, school, or art movement. This may involve all the elements and principles of art and other factors often very difficult to analyze precisely. By changing the way they paint, apply color, texture, perspective, or the way they see shapes and ideas, the artist establishes a certain set of rules. If other artists see the rules as valid for themselves, they might also apply these characteristics. The works of art then take on that specific style. An artist may give the style a name such as Expressionism, or a name may be applied later, as in the case of abstract art. The term style refers to the resemblance works of art have to one another. Enough visual elements must be shared by enough works to make their combination distinctive and recognizable to a number of people. A single cathedral can't define the Gothic style any more than a single sculpture can define the style of its artist. Furthermore, the idea must convey meaning to enough people to become widely used. Art history is filled with stylistic definitions that were proposed but never adopted or did not survive for long. This is not surprising. Ideas and tastes change. Different things seem important at different times, and there always are major works that do not fit into a particular definition of a style. Abstract Expressionism, perhaps America's greatest contribution to the history of modern art, is abstract Expressionism, which dominated the New York scene for a decade and a half subsequent to World War II. Though less cohesive as an art movement, its common thread centered around an opposition to the strict formalism characteristic of much of abstract art at the time. The movement, which owed its existence to a new evaluation of the individual, spread quickly following the defeat of totalitarianism in the Second World War. The founders of abstract expressionism include Arshile Gorky, Hans Hofmann, Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Franz Klein, and Mark Rothko. Art Deco. Art Deco refers generally to the decorative arts of the 1920s and 1930s in Europe and America. The style derived its name from the Paris Exposition des Arts Décoratifs in 1928, with an emphasis centered around individuality and ornate workmanship. The movement rebelled against the contemporary doctrines of the Bauhaus and the prototypes for machine production, which were the ideals behind the Deutscher Werkbund. Art Deco, known for its streamlined style, was hailed as the ultimate in modernity during the 1930s. It drew inspiration from eclectic sources including Art Nouveau, Cubism, and fashion design. The style reached its greatest heights literally in New York's Chrysler Building, 1928 to 1930, and in the drawings of Arte, who has since become known as the father of Art Deco. Cubism. Cubism, an early 20th century movement, was highly influential to painting and sculpture. This revolutionary change in technique and perception of reality was created principally by painters Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque in Paris between 1907 and 1914. The Cubist style emphasized the flat, two-dimensional surface of the picture plane. Cubist painters no longer sought to disintegrate the objects but to reassert it, often by rejecting the traditional techniques of perspective, foreshortening, modeling, and chiaroscuro. Cubist painters were not bound to copying form, texture, color, and space from reality in a traditional sense, but presented a new reality in paintings that depicted radically fragmented objects whose several sides were seen simultaneously. The barrier between reality and representation is broken. Bits of the real object make their way into the picture. Newspaper clippings, lengths of rope, and similar found objects. Dada. Attacking every cultural standard and every form of artistic activity. The roots of Dada can be traced to the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich in 1916. Dada, a name which was intended as nonsense, soon became international. The movement sought the discovery of authentic reality through the abolition of traditional culture and aesthetic forms. A group was quickly organized in New York by Marcel Duchamp, centering around Gallery 291, which had been founded by photographers Alfred Stieglitz and Edward Eichen. Futurism. Futurism developed in Italy during the first decade of the 20th century. The movement emphasized the energy and speed of the machine and was strongly opposed to existing notions of Italy as vast museum of times past. As early as 1909, Futurists launched a program advocating the destruction of academies and monumental cities as impediments to progress. The rhetoric was intended to inspire public anger and to arouse controversy. Impressionism as a major movement in art history. Impressionism followed the realist movement and the invention of photography. The movement developed primarily in France during the mid-1860s and throughout the 1870s. Although it lasted only about 15 years in its purest form, it determined in one way or another nearly every artistic manifestation that has taken place since. Impressionist artists became fascinated with the transformation light brought upon natural objects and surfaces. Color is no longer seen as a property of the object itself, but of the moment of the perception of light, and thus changes with the time of day and density of the atmosphere. The Impressionists were the first to render the full intensity of natural light and the glow of natural colors. Pop art. Although thought of as distinctly American, pop art actually began in London during the mid-1950s. Nevertheless, the central figures among the pop artists are all Americans, and the movement reached its zenith in New York during the 1960s. Marcel Duchamp was still active at this time and exerted strong influence on the new generation. Pop derives much from Dada, born from a similar period of frustration. The term pop art was first used by English critic Laurence Alloway in 1958 issue of Architectural Digest to describe works celebrating mass production, advertising, and consumerism. Surrealism. As the nihilism of Dada gradually lost favor, Surrealism took the next step, that of exploring the workings of the subconscious mind with free association of imagery and juxtaposing of subject matter. The French author André Breton published the Surrealist Manifesto in 1924. Initially a literary movement, artists were quick to see the possibilities afforded the emphasis on subconscious association. The first Surrealist exhibition took place in 1925 at the Galerie Perret in Paris. The painters most closely associated with Surrealism were Max Ernst, Joan Miro, René Magritte, and Salvatore Dali. Recap. In this episode, we discussed the following topics: fundamentals of creativity in arts, defining creativity, logic, style, abstract expressionism, cubism, art deco, futurism, impressionism, pop art, surrealism. In another episode, we will be continuing this topic with the rest of the fundamentals of art in creativity like value, tools of art, illustration and art. Goodbye and take care.